The deck was short, the engine in front of him was enormous, and when the throttle went forward, there was no room for hesitation. On the pitching deck of a World War II aircraft carrier, a Corsair pilot could not see what lay directly ahead. The long nose of the F4U-4 blocked the runway, the sea beyond, and any margin for error. All he could feel was raw power, violent, unforgiving, and barely restrained. In that moment, the aircraft was not simply a machine. It was a test of nerve. The F4U-4 Corsair would earn a reputation as one of the most formidable American fighter aircraft ever built. Fast, heavily armed, nearly indestructible in combat. Yet the same qualities that made it lethal against the enemy also made it dangerous to its own pilots. A sudden surge of power could twist the aircraft sideways. A single mistake during takeoff could end a career or a life before the war had truly begun. This was the paradox of the Corsair, a weapon of dominance forged without compromise. A machine that demanded absolute discipline on the mental field.
More rivets on the starboard side.
Corsair did not emerge from comfort or excess. It was born from urgency. By the early years of World War II, the United States faced a brutal reality in the Pacific. Vast distances, hostile seas, and an enemy that had mastered lightweight, agile fighters forced American planners to rethink everything they knew about naval aviation. What the Navy and Marine Corps needed was not elegance. They needed dominance. The Corsair's design philosophy reflected this mindset. It was built around power first, survivability second, and pilot comfort a distant third. At the heart of the aircraft's structure was a fuselage made of carefully shaped aluminum forms, connected by longer arms that balanced strength with weight savings. Sheets of aluminum some nearly a tenth of an inch thick covered the frame, while fabric control surfaces reduced unnecessary mass. This was not refinement for its own sake. Every choice served combat endurance. The fuselage itself evolved in shape along its length. Forward of the cockpit, it was broad and oval, accommodating the massive engine and its systems. Further back, it narrowed into a T-shaped cross-section, then tapered into a conical rear. Internally, the aircraft was divided into four main sections: engine, forward, middle, and rear, separated by bulkheads, including a critical fireproof barrier between the engine and the pilot. Survivability was engineered into the airframe from the beginning.
We're getting excessive vibration at high RPM. Look at the stress fracture here.
To extract maximum performance from its engine, engineers selected an enormous propeller. The problem was simple and unforgiving. A propeller that large demanded ground clearance. Traditional Wong landing gear would have been heavy, fragile, and ill-suited to carrier operations. The solution would become one of the most recognizable features in aviation history. The inverted gull wing was not an aesthetic choice. It was a compromise shaped by physics, carrier decks, and war. By angling the wing downward at the root and upward toward the tips, designers shortened the landing gear without sacrificing propeller clearance. At the same time, they reduced drag at the wing to fuselage junction, extracting precious speed from the airframe. This innovation came at a cost. The wing structure became more complex, heavier, and harder to manufacture. Yet in wartime America, complexity was acceptable, failure was not. From the beginning, the Corsair was designed to operate where mistakes were fatal. Carrier decks were narrow, unstable, and unforgiving. Takeoffs were short, landings were violent. There was no room for aircraft that lacked strength or pilots who lacked discipline. The Corsair would soon prove it had both, but it would also prove that raw power, when unleashed without compromise, always demands a price. If the Corsair's fuselage was its backbone, the wing was its declaration of intent.
This unique inverted gull wing design optimized the integration of the landing gear, providing crucial structural support for the stresses of combat.
By angling the wing downward at the root and upward toward the outer sections, the designers achieved something critical. Shorter, stronger landing gear that could survive repeated carrier landings while still providing clearance for the massive propeller. At the same time, this configuration reduced aerodynamic drag, where the wing met the fuselage, an area that punished poorly designed aircraft with lost speed and wasted power. The result was an airframe that looked unconventional, even awkward, but performed with ruthless efficiency. The wing roots housed large intakes for oil coolers and the engine supercharger, feeding the Corsair's air-cooled radial engine during high-speed flight and steep climbs. These intakes served a practical purpose, but they also produced a sound that would become infamous. During dives, air rushing through the ducts created a high-pitched whistle that echoed across the battlefield. Japanese ground troops would later give the Corsair a name that reflected both fear and experience: Whistling Death. Strength was another defining feature. The Corsair's wing structure was engineered to withstand forces up to 11 G, far beyond what many pilots could endure. This allowed aggressive maneuvering in combat, sharp pullouts from dives, and the ability to absorb punishment without structural failure.
Clear the
Holding
deck
outer
now.
wing panels
Move that
made the
Corsair
aircraft
up.
suitable for crowded carrier
Watch your
decks,
starboard side.
conserving precious space without sacrificing combat capability. Beneath the wings, the Corsair revealed its true versatility. Hard points allowed it to carry bombs up to 1,000 pounds, drop tanks for extended range, or racks of 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets. In the air, it could hunt enemy fighters. Over the battlefield, it could strike ground targets with devastating effect. Few aircraft of the era combined these roles so effectively. Even small aerodynamic details mattered. Early in the Corsair's development, engineers discovered a dangerous flaw: uneven stall behavior between the wings during low-speed flight.
The precisely placed stall strip forces the airflow to separate here, ensuring the wing stalls progressively rather than all at once.
This small addition ensured predictable stall characteristics, reducing the risk of sudden roll and catastrophic crashes during landing. It was a quiet fix, but one that saved lives. The Corsair's control surfaces further reflected its dual nature. Large flaps could deflect up to 50 degrees for carrier landings, allowing the aircraft to slow without stalling. At smaller
In the heat of battle, the Corsair's maneuverability was unmatched, allowing pilots to escape the tightest corners.
The aircraft demanded precision, but it rewarded skill. By this stage, the Corsair was no longer just a prototype or a theoretical solution. It was a fully realized weapon, fast, durable, and terrifyingly capable. Yet, as its performance envelope expanded, so did the margin for error. The same design choices that gave the Corsair dominance in the air would soon reveal a darker side, one driven not by aerodynamics, but by raw, uncontrollable power. The Corsair's greatest strength was also its most dangerous flaw. At the front of the aircraft sat the Pratt & Whitney R280018W, double Wasp and air-cooled radial engine built without restraint. 18 cylinders, arranged in two rows, displaced more than 46 liters, and delivered power levels that pushed the limits of piston engine aviation. With water methanol injection engaged, the engine could unleash wartime emergency power exceeding 2,400 horsepower. For a brief moment, the Corsair became something extraordinary, and then the clock began to run. This surge of power came at a brutal cost. Wartime emergency power was never meant to last. Even short use could destroy the engine from within, reducing its operational life from hundreds of hours to minutes. During World War II, fighter engines were often considered expendable, averaging barely 2 months of combat service. The Corsair embodied this reality. It was designed to win battles, not to age gracefully. But mechanical limits were only part of the danger. The massive propeller translated engine power into violent torque. When the throttle was advanced too quickly, the aircraft could roll sharply to one side, especially at low speed. During takeoff, or a wave off from a carrier landing, this behavior could become lethal. A moment's hesitation, an instinctive overcorrection, and the aircraft could clip a wing or flip entirely. These incidents were not rare. Early Corsair squadrons learned quickly that this aircraft punished inexperience. Among naval aviators, it earned an unforgiving nickname, the Ensign Eliminator. It was not the enemy that claimed these pilots, but the machine itself. Training evolved out of necessity. Pilots were taught to advance the throttle with deliberate restraint, to anticipate torque with rudder input, and to respect the aircraft's narrow margin at low speed. Discipline became survival. Those who mastered the Corsair found an aircraft that would fight relentlessly on their behalf. Those who did not rarely received a second chance. The cockpit reflected this balance between control and chaos. Armored glass and steel protected the pilot, while an intricate layout of switches, levers, and gauges demanded constant attention. There was no automation to absorb mistakes. Every phase of flight from engine start to landing required intention and precision. In the Corsair, technology did not forgive weakness. It amplified it. Yet this unforgiving nature also forged a generation of pilots who understood that air superiority was not granted by machines alone. It was earned through discipline, judgment, and an acceptance of risk that modern warfare rarely demands. The Corsair would soon prove that those risks were not taken in vain, but the cost was always counted first in lives. Measured only by its technical specifications, the F4U-4 Corsair was an impressive machine. Measured by its impact on American air power, it was something more enduring. It represented a shift in how the United States approached aerial warfare, one that favored overwhelming capability over simplicity and adaptability over specialization. During World War II, the Corsair achieved a remarkable air-to-air victory ratio of more than 11-1. This statistic was not the product of chance. It reflected a combination of speed, climb performance, firepower, and durability that allowed American pilots to dictate the terms of engagement. Against lighter enemy fighters, the Corsair could choose when to fight and when to disengage. It was an aircraft that imposed its will on the sky. Yet the Corsair's true strategic value extended beyond air combat. As the war progressed, American doctrine increasingly emphasized close air support and interdiction. The Corsair's ability to carry bombs, rockets, or fuel tanks made it a flexible tool in this evolving strategy. In the Korean War, long after jet aircraft had entered service,
the F4U
Corsair remained relevant not as an interceptor, but as a rugged ground attack platform capable of absorbing damage and returning home. From an American perspective, this longevity mattered. The Corsair validated a core belief in U.S. military planning, that industrial strength and engineering depth could produce weapons with long-term strategic value.
The F4U-4
While some
Corsair,
contemporaries were optimized for narrow roles,
the Mustang or the Spitfire,
the Corsair adapted. It evolved with the battlefield rather than being replaced by it. Internationally, the aircraft earned a reputation that transcended national lines. Allied forces respected its effectiveness. Opponents feared its presence, particularly in low-altitude strikes where its rockets and machine guns could devastate exposed positions. The psychological effect of its approach, announced by the whistle of air through its intakes, became part of its combat identity. The lesson the Corsair left behind was clear. Technology alone does not win wars. But when power, discipline, and doctrine align, a single aircraft can influence how wars are fought and remembered. When the guns finally fell silent and carrier decks gave way to jet runways, the F4U-4 Corsair did not vanish into obscurity. It endured.
This propeller mechanism is cleared for deployment.
Were built, and over 2,000 of them were F4U-4 seconds machines refined at the peak of piston engine warfare. Few combat aircraft have remained in frontline service as long,
from the
or
Pacific
adapted as
jungles to the frozen chosen,
to changing
answered the
wars.
call.
From the island-hopping campaigns of World War II to the frozen valleys of Korea, the Corsair proved that relevance was not tied to novelty. Jets were faster, but they were fragile. The Corsair was not. It absorbed ground fire, carried heavy ordnance, and returned pilots home when newer aircraft could not. In an age of rapid technological change, it remained useful because it was honest about what war demanded. The Corsair's legacy is not defined solely by victory ratios or production numbers. It is defined by the men who flew it. Pilots who learned early that power without discipline was fatal. That survival depended not on automation, but on judgment. That mastery came at a cost measured in training accidents, blood lessons, and lives lost before combat ever began. This aircraft did not promise safety, it promised capability. In that sense, the Corsair represents a broader truth about the era that produced it. World War II forced nations to accept machines that pushed human limits, not because they were ideal, but because they were. The Corsair was a product of American industry at full mobilization, willing to trade comfort for dominance, simplicity for performance, and caution for decisive advantage. Today, preserved in museums or roaring at air shows, the Corsair no longer fights wars, but its presence still carries weight. It reminds us that technological progress is never neutral, and that every advantage in war carries a human cost. So, the question remains, in a world that increasingly seeks precision without risk, what lessons are we willing to remember from an aircraft that demanded everything from those who flew it? If history still matters, that is a question worth asking.